Okay, good morning. By our time here, it's 11 a.m. on the dot. So good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. Um, this is Edugist Roundtable. Please we implore that everybody is muted until you are asked to speak. So once again, welcome to Edugist Roundtable. At Edugist, we are an impact media organization telling the story of education in Africa because we believe that this is the right time to do what we are doing. Education plays a very pivotal role for the development of our continent, Africa. So our journalism centered around investigative journalism, multimedia journalism, and most importantly, it is data-driven. And so we are the only newsroom in Africa dedicated to talking about education, to reporting about education. In addition to our newsroom, we run a state-of-the-art studio where we produce content for education and do all the necessary production and documentary around education. And we go beyond being a newsroom. Basically, we are the center of leading conversation around Africa, around what is important. And so that is why we started this roundtable, the Edugist Roundtable, so that we can begin to look at key issues, particularly for Nigerians on the call. We know that in 18 days, we are going to have a new government, a new president. In June, we are going to have a new National Assembly. Across 26 states, there's going to be a change in government, both at the executive level, governors and their executives, and of course the legislature. And so there is a need for us to have this conversation for agenda setting for education. And so this is why today the roundtable is centered on financing gap for education. And we're asking a very simple question. Can African countries afford their SDG 4 benchmarks, right? And what are we trying to achieve with this? As we all know on the call, quality education is a fundamental human right for all. However, funding, amongst other factors, has made education less of a right and more of a privilege. And it shouldn't be so. Now, according to UNESCO latest report on education financing, Nigeria and other low and lower middle income countries in the continent and across other developing nations need to invest $97 billion per year to meet the education target for education as far as SDG is concerned. And in just a few days, we would have done 50% time of the SDG aspiration. That means we have 7.5 years to go. So how far have we fared? Now, with the rising debt profile amidst rising population, the question is, Nigeria, for me, and for yourself, wherever you're joining in from in Africa, put your country there. Can government achieve this target? Well, I'm just going to be your moderator. My name is Elvis Boniface. I am the CEO of Edugist, the newsroom convening this, and we are doing this in partnership with UNESCO GM. And we'll be hearing from the horse's mouth, of course, the people that came up with the report. And to do us that honor, will be the director of the Global Education Monitoring Report, Manos Antonis. He has been key player as far as this is concerned. And so you have his profile there, Zoom, because we don't want to waste a lot of time. At the end of his presentation, we are going to have a conversation centered around that. And then around the policy side of that conversation, we have Dr. Adetola Salau. She's the Senior Special Advisor to the Executive Governor of Lagos State. Prior to joining government, she is a social innovator with a very strong instinct when it comes to STEM. But currently she has been in government for more than 3 years. And also to weigh in is Akim Subair. He's joining us from Canada this morning. He's the co-founder and CEO of 1 Million Teachers. He's an adjunct professor of innovation and change management at Queen's. He will also come in. We did a little detour, and when we're looking at this conversation, we felt how do we hear from parents, who bear the blunt in Africa when government have failed to send their word to school? And so that is where we have someone that can speak on behalf of parents here. We have Adewumi Adedamola. He's an engineer by profession, but for the purpose of this conversation, he is the chairman of the Parents Teachers Association at Queen's College. And then at the end of Manu's presentation, all our panelists will throw questions at them. If you've not known about Edugist, as I said earlier, we are a newsroom. We tell the story of education online. Online, you find us at www.edugist.org. We think that you probably would have followed all our social media channel. Back in Lagos, we do a radio show that is a bit suspended at the moment. And then we do events like this. And then we have town hall meetings back home in Nigeria. We, myself and my team, centered everywhere in the office. We are reaching you from Lagos. And so without much ado, we want to welcome you. And then we'll pass the floor to Manus for his presentation on this report with particular implications to what this means for Africa and Nigeria as a case study. Over to you, Manus. Thank you.
Thank you, Elvis. Thank you so much for the kind invitation to join your program. As you said, I'm the director of the Global Education Monitoring Report, which is a report that exists for the last 21 years. It is mandated by the world's governments to monitor progress on education in the Sustainable Development Goals, but also to monitor progress in the implementation of national and international strategies to achieve SDG 4. And that, of course, makes financing a core part of the types of issues that we're looking at. What you showed my profile, of course, I'm here as a representative of a global entity, but it also happens that I have worked in Nigeria over a period of 4 years, a few years back, and that also included some work with public financial issues in education. So I'm happy to engage more with your panelists and with anyone else who wants to ask questions also on some Nigerian issues, even though I'm not fully up to date because that was some time ago before I joined the Global Education Monitoring Report. I just want to make sure that my presentation is not technical, but so feel free to stop me if I say anything that is not clear enough. But just to say that the Global Education Monitoring Report has already several times in the past, starting in 2010, tried to get an estimate of how much it will cost low and lower middle income countries to achieve targets. At the time when we started, the targets were the so-called Education for All targets, and they were relatively unambitious in the sense that the main objective to be achieved was universal primary education completion for 2015. Now, I say relatively unambitious because we are already in 2023, and we know that many countries will not achieve that objective that for some African countries was set for the first time back to 1980 to be achieved by 1980. But we know that many countries will not achieve that even well into the 2030s. But in 2015, the world took an even more ambitious take and said that basically countries should achieve universal secondary education completion and a range of other objectives related to early childhood, related to the quality of education, related to post-secondary education to some extent. That's, of course, extremely ambitious. So what we did in 2015 was to at least cost a subset, but perhaps a costliest subset of that, which is the achievement of at least 1 year of pre-primary education for all children, and the achievement of universal secondary, primary and secondary completion, with some assumptions additionally on equity, because it takes more resources to bring into school the more marginalized children that have not yet made it to the end of primary school, let alone into secondary, and some assumptions about what we need to pay teachers in order to make sure that we attract the best talent and we make sure that they remain in the profession. That's perhaps a bit less of an issue now in the world's poorest countries, but in slightly wealthier countries, teacher shortage has become now one of the major policy concerns. So we wanted to anticipate that and have some assumptions about what it would take to ensure that we maintain the teaching profession an attractive opportunity for graduates. We know it's not the case, generally speaking. So a core driver of our assumptions is to ensure that there is a competitive pay package for teachers to attract them to this particular job with its difficulties. So we did a costing in 2015. At the time, we estimated that it would take essentially $140 billion per year to achieve that. And we did an update in 2020 when COVID struck, when we realized that many of the targets we had set were likely to become even more difficult to reach. Also, we had noticed that between 2015 and 2020, there had not been very rapid progress as we would have anticipated. And that matters because the more you postpone the investment, then the costlier, of course, it becomes the closer you come to the deadline, and the deadline was 2030. Now, we are in 2023. We don't even know the full impact that COVID-19 has had on long-term trends in enrollment. It's emerging. It's probably not very, very strong, despite the turmoil. Maybe a bit of a slowdown, but still not particularly strong when it comes to enrollment. We don't know the effects on learning. That is likely to have been very, very serious. But the model that we have does not cost achievement of universal secondary completion and of learning outcomes, because we have very few theories which tell us how much every dollar can spend in terms of improved literacy and numeracy. Unfortunately, the evidence on that is very, very limited. So it's not safe to do assumptions that would be too wild and not really focus on drawing on evidence. So what the model tries to cost is the cost of ensuring that all children are in school. But we know by 2023, for instance, in Africa, 1 in 4 children still do not finish primary school today as we speak. Therefore, there's no way we can achieve universal secondary completion practically. It's too late. So the cost essentially of achieving our target is infinite. If we cannot realistically achieve it, however much money one spends, we're still not going to achieve the result. So what we did was one switch to our assumptions, and perhaps a very practical but also very meaningful change. In 2015, all countries in the world were invited as part of the roadmap for achieving SDG 4, our global education goal, to set what the document said, national benchmarks. What does that mean? We know that some of these targets are extremely ambitious and unfair. We cannot expect all countries to achieve universal secondary education completion. Practically today, maybe there are only 1 or 2 or 3 countries that achieve universal secondary completion. I think Japan, the Republic of Korea are the exception. Even there, it's probably 99. I think still there might be a few young people who are left out. Globally, it's about 60%. But of course, there are countries with secondary completion rates well below 20%. So it's not realistic to have a common target for all countries. Every country should set a target that is meaningful for its context. And that was what the national SDG 4 benchmarks aim to achieve, to set targets that would be based on some knowledge of how quickly countries can progress and encourage them to be a bit more ambitious than doing business as usual, as we know. So the process began, and since 2021, we have the majority of countries in the world, about 3 in 4, setting national targets for 7 indicators that are universally relevant for all countries. They include early childhood education participation, they include out-of-school rates, they include completion rates at both primary, lower secondary, and upper secondary education. They include an estimate of the gender gap that countries are prepared to live with, because it's quite significant in many countries in both directions. In poorer countries, too many girls are not completing secondary school. In richer countries, it's usually the other way around. Also as targets on learning outcomes in reading and mathematics, targets on the percentage of teachers who are trained, and finally, targets on financing, how much countries are prepared to spend out of the public budgets on education. So what we have done for the costing is we lowered the bar, given that we cannot achieve universal targets, and try to cost what it would take for countries to achieve the national targets. And I can give you an example. For instance, Nigeria, which has participated in this process, has, for instance, stated that by 2030, it would aim to have 90% of children completing primary school, 83% achieving lower secondary school, and 74% achieving upper secondary education completion, the full 12 years of education. So we try to say, okay, what would it cost Nigeria and every country to achieve the targets that they have set? So this is basically the process we followed. As I mentioned, we have assumptions behind the how many teachers there should be in classrooms, how many classrooms need to be built, to be maintained, a few assumptions on costing, the extra efforts we need to make to bring the poorest children to school, and that means all sorts of interventions on different fronts. We don't specify them all, but we know that they cost more than the average student. So a range of those assumptions, and this is what took us to the conclusion that the financing gap that low and lower middle income countries have on average between now and 2030 to achieve their national targets, which are less ambitious than the universal global targets of everyone achieving them, is $97 billion per year. Of that, $70 billion are for African countries. So the vast majority of the cost, the gap, of the financing gap, is located in Africa. I can say a number of things behind that, how important this cost is. Well, it may sound like a big number. In some ways, it is. It depends, of course, how one presents it. One practical way is to say, well, it is and it isn't, in the sense that it would basically amount to 3% of those 3 weeks of global military spending in the world to make progress in that respect. So it is really not that much. But if you think how much money low-income countries, for instance, spend, the financing gap amounts to 50% of the cost. So it is really a very, very large amount. Even if countries make progress in raising resources in the way we have seen countries doing so in the past from the national budget, and these are probably a little bit ambitious in the sense that many of the world's poorest countries right now are faced with quite a concerning increase in their public debt, which could have very serious implications if they're not addressed soon enough. Let's not forget, 30 years ago, the world's poorest countries faced a similar debt crisis that had really terrible impact on public spending, and not just on public spending, especially on public social spending. So even with therefore ambitious assumptions about how quickly countries can raise resources in the coming 7 years, based on past trends which may not materialize, the gap is 50% of the total cost that we have estimated. It's a bit lower as a percentage of the total cost for lower middle income countries like Nigeria. It's 17%, but again, this is average, and I think that's a very important lesson a message for our conversation. these are global estimates for all these countries. They may be, different for each country individually. Different countries are making different investments in education, and I think that's the key topic for our discussion in the coming minutes. So I'll say stop here. I think I have given you a bit of a general introduction on what we have done and why. We want to alert countries about the cost implications. We want to alert the international community. For some of the world's poorest countries, external financing can be a major source, but sometimes such external financing is not very well targeted. It doesn't go to the countries most in need. It doesn't go to the levels in education that need most support. So there are a lot of opportunities to improve how such external financing is provided. But it's also a reminder that education needs to be prioritized if we really are serious about the targets that we have set as countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manus. Thank you indeed. He talked about the money is huge, and maybe it isn't. And he referenced how much we spend on military. And last week, the Brookings Institute released a report, and one of the findings of that report was that if nations invest so much in early childhood education, that the expense on defense, military, and everything is going to drop by a whopping 91.2%, because that way you don't have young folks who are going to recruit to becoming bandits. And he has stated a couple of things. We had tried to summarize the report on our website, and you can go there to look at it. But 4 pillars around this report that we want to look at. I will allow you, Manus, to catch your breath while I speak to the panelists first. And I will start with Tola. So Tola is in government. It's top government for that matter, if you want to say it. Dr. Tola, so you are in Lagos State, and as a government, I think that you people are not doing so badly. But how do we take this to the national level following this report? Good thing, this amount required is less than 12.6% of our current budget. So it's clear that we are not going to meet that, taking Nigeria as a case study. So my question, Dr. Tola, is how do we intervene at the national level? How have you people done that in Lagos? Is the funding of education in Lagos coming just from the state budget? Are you being creative enough to explore other avenues to saying that this thing is done by all means?
Okay. Let me first of all start by saying good morning to everyone else who is on this panel and other people who are here to listen to our ideas and hopefully go back and think about implementation. I've also been listening to, what's his name? Mr. Manus, right? Yes. I am in the States, so I'm on the east side of the United States right now. So it's pretty early in the morning, but this is an important discussion that we need to have. So I set my alarm so I could get up and be here. Yes, in Lagos State, I am quite proud of the work we've been doing in Lagos State. First of all, if you look at our budget, we have the highest allocation for education in any budget across the nation. Our budget is even higher than that of other capital expenditures, like higher than the budget for Ministry of Works. This is something that is unprecedented. The specific percentage eludes me right now. I think it's because I'm barely awake. But you can check it out for yourself. For the past 3 years, we've deliberately had education as the highest allocation for anything. And that is because it's something that the governor he had set out when he was campaigning that he was going to make a priority, and he kept his word. He made it a priority. And one of those areas that we've been doing a lot of spending, of course, has been the creation of the schools, because as we know, we don't have enough schools for our students, both at the primary and the secondary level. Then at the tertiary level, we opened 2 new universities. One of them is dedicated to education itself. It's a college of education, which means in that college, in that tertiary institution, all that we focus on is raising and boosting and training teachers who are going to come in and replace, unfortunately, the aged workforce that we have. I'm sure that's something that all of us know. I'm not saying something that's new. We have an aged workforce, an aging, workforce, and quite a bit of them have retired and are going to continue to retire. And then another area that we've been spending a lot on has been the training of teachers itself. We've had a lot of programs, both primary and the secondary level, where we've been doing training programs, working on boosting this capacity of the teachers so that it will step down to the students. And of course, teacher welfare, which I heard Manus allude to. And one thing I'm quite proud of is, even with COVID and a lot of budgetary restraints, we continue to pay our teachers, both primary and secondary. And even the salaries for the teachers increased as we increased the salaries for other civil servants last year. And let's see, welfare. We've also created quite a number of programs to incentivize the teachers. We've had the Teacher Merit Award, where we encourage the teachers who perform really, really great with different prizes. And of course, a lot of publicity so that people see that the teaching profession is something that we're very serious about and we place highly. There you go. And I'm trying to remember, there are other programs we've also had in terms of, we've been traveling with our teachers for programs out of the country, science programs, early childhood programs. I'm trying to remember, there have been fantastic programs. The programs we had around entrepreneurship, I was a part of that. We've also had traveling to Finland so that they could see what is done in TVET, that's in vocational education. We've had all these great programs so that people see that the teaching profession is not one that, you're just a teacher. No. In fact, our teachers, I'm very proud to say, are paid even better than a lot of their colleagues in the private schools. So that's another thing that I'm very proud that Lagos State has done. Let's see, teacher welfare. Why am I missing? I feel like in the back of my head, I'm missing something that is important in regards to teacher welfare.
We can always come back.
Okay, so go ahead.
We can always come back. Okay. Yes. So thank you so much, Dr. Tola, Senior Special Advisor to the Governor on Education, Lagos State, Nigeria. I will go to Hakeem Suber. Before I do that, Edugist as a newsroom, we also powered the Education Voices Network. And there are a couple of people that has really helped us in kicking that off. Some we've never met in person yet. We have Ms. Oyin Egbeyemi. Thank you for joining the call. We have Shola Adiola. Thank you for joining the call as well. We have Vanessa. Sasi, you have been quite supportive as we all bring our voices together as educators to ensuring that things begin to work or things get better. Thank you so much. We have Nwanitu. She has contributed a very brilliant article that did so very well. Thank you so much for being part of the network. And of course, to the people powering the network. Now, during Manu's presentation, Mr. Hakeem, a few things I took out and we also got from the report are basically 4 pointers. So there is a lower than expected GDP as a country to power our educational system. There is a low fall of teachers. There is a modest rise in student enrollment. We did some local sampling before jumping on this call. And the best public school, we had 1 to 55 ratio in a classroom, but the National Policy on Education has recommended 1 to 25. So there is a shortfall in all angles. Relevant sector that powers the economy, like oil and gas, it's not working. We are looking for $800 million for subsidy and all that. So the question is, Mr. Hakeem, if you were going to do a proposal to the incoming government using the case study, the use case, how to finance and close the gap in education, in the finance gap in education. What are those very potent but unconventional recommendations you will make?
Thank you, Elvis, for inviting me here. I thank Manos for that amazing presentation, really, really insightful. And other panelists who are here, Tola, good to see you again. I've been reflecting on this for some time. I've had access to a few reports over time, particularly the one that really, really resonated with me very recently is the 2018 World Education Report by the World Bank. But back to the subject of the matter, this report and what the moderator, Elvis, what he just said about what's unconventional. I don't know about whether they are conventional. I think these are just commonsensical things that anybody who is faced with a very difficult situation should kind of look at. First of all, and Manos, you highlighted this, finding money from development institutions. There are all manners of money around, however, they come with certain restrictions. And I think that those funds are not as available as they were in the past, given the somewhat global financial crisis, the rising cost of debt and all of that everybody is facing. But as we also know, and as you have been highlighted here today, the fact that Africa is significantly more impacted by all of these crises. So if you ask me, I would say, well, you have all of these constraints. One of my favorite learning is from what Jeff Bezos, that's the CEO of Amazon, talks about constraints. Constraints make you inventive. So when you're faced with a situation like this, what do? You have very limited sources of funding, and which continues to shrink vis-a-vis the challenge that you face. Personally, I would say that you need to have a few priorities. If you know that you can achieve everything, focus on the things particularly the things that have very high leverage. First of all, as far as I am concerned, the government has no business investing in so many other parts of education, and without downplaying the importance of tertiary institutions. I think they are very relevant for progress, for innovation and whatnot. But I think that fundamentally the focus should be on basic education. How do we get our kids to be functional in the society? Basic numeracy, basic literacy, put a significant amount of your funding in those areas. And then if you would invest in tertiary education, let it be, and even if you say, because you're thinking about the poor, the students from poor homes, there are all kinds of scholarship, and we've seen how it works in so many other developed parts of the world. So my priority will be, just double down on basic education, concentrate your energy on the things that is most significant. Most of the knowledge that we need to function in a society is really basic education, our secondary school education, ability to read and write, particularly when you're motivated in a world that we have access to so much information. I think we can take it from there. In addition to that, I will say that if the government can ensure that everybody literally has access to sources of information. And what do I mean by that? I mean that imagine where in almost every public space, people have access to internet. You can imagine the amount of creativity that will be unleashed, the amount of economic activity that will be generated, which would further go along to expand the government's tax base, which will lead to more economic prosperity. That means that the government can generate more revenue for taxes, which they can then channel into education. But for me also is the fact that I feel like, just like I mentioned, the priority areas focusing on basic education is asking yourself, where are the places where if I were to invest some little amount of money, what kind of leverage would I get from it? And one of those, apart from basic education that I highlighted earlier, is teacher development. I think we're not doing enough, honestly, in terms of teacher development. And when I say teacher development, I'm talking about the whole pathway from what manner of students are attracted into that profession, what kind of incentive systems are available for them, up till the time where they get into their profession in the workplace. How are we ensuring that the very best of candidates go through that pipeline, and the very best of our workforce are the ones providing education to the upcoming generation? This is a highly, it's a big leverage activity to the extent that if you do not do anything and you invested most of your resources on teachers, I think you'll get a bigger outcome. So that's really my summary. We can go down a rabbit hole, but for me, it is really, really looking at the constraints that you have, looking at the what you can do about those constraints, but more around focusing on key priority areas. You know, and I've talked about focusing on basic education, basic literacy, basic numeracy, finding ways to ensure that we have the most capable teachers supporting our education system. I think I'll just stop for now. If there is any other full-on discussions, I'm happy to go.
Yes, thank you very much, Akim. That was something enough. I think still following the conversation, we deliberately wanted to ensure that we have a parent on the call. And that is when I'll speak to the next panelist, Engineer Adedamola Adewoye. So recently we spoke with him in his capacity as the chairman of PTA Queen's College. And there is a huge debt profile we hold as a country. In fact, the middle class is gradually disappearing. And then the government is saying, we have done something with the Universal Basic Education Act instituted in 1999. And the point is, in the first 9 years of education, primary to tertiary are supposed to have education. So kudos to government. Now, the problem today we hear from government is that state are not benchmarking with their counterpart fund to assess this funding. Now the question is, I would want to believe that Queen's College, you live in Lagos, you are in the middle class. When we take away the engineer Adedamola out of the equation, what happens to the average Nigerian child? How do we have their education, an education that even have value? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. Let me start by saying that education is highly underfunded. I was privileged to attend a Senate hearing on education in secondary schools in Nigeria, where there was a motion for unity schools to be privatized. And what I told them, because I'm a product of unity school, what I told them in that hearing was that majority of our leaders benefited from absolutely close to free education. However, the dynamics is changing. If you travel abroad, maybe UK, Finland, as long as you are there, you have access to education, at least up to secondary school level. What I see, like has been said by Antonius, is the budgetary allocation of government is inadequate. And that is what I said, that we should set our priorities right as a country to ensure that the budget captures more of education. Education is a tool for national development. If you don't get it right in terms of education, then you are going nowhere. And I sincerely feel that as a nation, we have not done well for education. I would say that when I saw the topic, financing the gap in education, I was moved because it has always been a burden for me. The quality of education that we received when we were going to school was very high. Government was deliberate in building unity schools to foster national integration. And what I see now is totally different. It's like government is already withdrawing tactically from the business. And what is making it worse also is that the private sector has not included funding of education in their budgets in terms of CSR. It's not visible. And it is a major concern if we are to achieve this SDG 4 goal that we are all clamoring for. And like you said, as PTA chairman of a unity school, I have mixed with all tribes and tongues and all the cadres of the society, including those that are as low as cleaners, gatemen. We are benefiting currently from a subsidized, how will I put it, education in unity schools, whereby you have, you pay more or less like a token that is affordable. But however, there are concerns. When last was there a teacher recruitment in the public space in Nigeria? Some teachers are already traveling abroad. What is the replacement plan? What is the training plan? What is the welfare package? For some of us in PTA, and we feel that our children are at the receiving end if government is not responding on time. And you can't blame the government because they will only work with the budget that they have, how will I put it, aligned for education. In this same budget is what the university system would capture from. The lecturers in the university are asking for more money. And from this little budget is what will service from primary, secondary, and university. And we felt that we can't wait for that in the PTA. And we took responsibility to find a way of augmenting what government has done. But I seriously feel that there is a strong need if we must achieve quality, because there's a difference from saying that schooling is free and accessible. What about the quality? You mentioned something about the teacher to student ratio. It's a major concern. By the time you have over 50 people in a class, it automatically means that the students won't be learning well. If you go and check their subject performance or class average performance, you see that they might not be assimilating well. So there are major concerns that we need to sit down and look at the budget. I recently proposed a model that worked for unity and for universities. Nothing stops the government from instituting a secondary school or primary school funding system, just like TED Fund. If you have that fund, you can get corporate organizations to pump money into it. And you go into the schools and see how you can deal some of these issues, how will I put it, once and for all. Well, for Lagos State, I would say that they are doing well, but they also need to do more. And let me just stop there for now. But the truth is that there is need for us to be deliberate in terms of funding education if we must make education accessible to the poor man. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Engineer, for those beautiful summation. We all know that we will always stay here. We want to have this conversation. But the duration for this conversation was meant to be 45 minutes, and we just achieved that on the dot. So every other further contribution we want to beg with you that you keep it straight to the point. It's a busy Thursday from whatever part of the world you are, so that next conversation you can always come around. The GEM team, they will be releasing a couple of reports this year, and so we believe that we'll be having subsequent roundtable. There's another one in June on budgeting. There's one on LTED. However, Manos, in light of all you've heard from other panelists, you know the Nigerian education terrain very well. What should be our take home?
Well, there are a couple of statistics that I want to share before closing that are important. Of course, you know, a few months ago, back in September last year, I think we caused quite a bit of a stir in Nigeria when we released jointly with the UNESCO Institute for Statistics our estimate of how many children are out of school, and children, adolescents and youth. And we came up with a very stark number of 20 million. That's, I think, became a key part of the presidential campaign. But the message was there is an issue. Nigeria was a champion, but has stagnated in terms of progress. So that's the first statistic. The second is that actually we don't really know how much public money is spent on education. Nigeria is one of those countries where it is still a bit of a mystery, of course, given the decentralized federal structure of the system. But the best estimate we have from a World Bank report about 10 years ago is that Nigeria was spending about 12% of its budget and 2% of GDP on education, when the rest of Africa as a whole spends well above 4% of GDP and well above 15% of the budget, which are the minimum benchmarks that have been set globally. And what does this mean? And I think that's what I want to leave you with a question for your next, perhaps, program. Nigeria is one of the countries in the world, maybe top 10 countries in the world, where households spend the largest part of the education spending in the country out of pocket. $7 out of $10 approximately come from the families. In the rest of the world, let's say about $3 out of $10 come out of pocket. In, of course, the rich countries, Finland was mentioned as an example, only 1 in 10 comes out of pocket. That is the big challenge for Nigeria. There was some mention that government over time has neglected education. So it's not just about meeting the cost of the targets, it's also how to shift more of the spending back to government and not out of pocket, because otherwise the education system will continue being very inequitable.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Manos. Indeed, insightful. It shows that a lot of work has to be done. I mean, at some point, just so you are aware, for those of us for people that live in Nigeria, during the campaign, we were asking where you people belong to, you people at UNESCO, whether you belong to the opposition party or whether you belong to the party in government, because we're really contesting those figures where you belong. But data don't lie, and it is our hope that every other person will work with that data, because it's quite scary what we have. We will take one question for Manos. Please just raise your hand. But while we are waiting for that, we'll just take a quick last round. We appreciate if our panelists can keep it at 1 minute on the dot, so that next time you can come back to the roundtable. We are very good with time. We don't like to waste people's time. And so we will start anti-clockwise. We have Engineer Adewumi to give his parting shot. We appreciate if you keep it at 1 minute. From there, we go to Mr. Kim, and then back to Tola, and then we take the question from Dr. Frederick, and that will be a wrap. You can download the report from UNESCO site or on Edugist, where we've been able to analyze the data, what it says about Sub-Saharan Africa, and you know our website, www.edugist.org, and you will always find what the latest news on education is. So, Engineer Adewumi, please, your parting shot. Let's stay within 60 seconds, please. I'm not sure he's still on the call. Mr. Akin, let's take your parting shot, please.
Thank you, Elvis. Thank you, everyone. And Manos, what there's a lot to take away from the stats, and I intend to dive even further on this. I mean, I'm just gonna kind of rehash what I said earlier, hoping that it sticks. And for me, it's always about focusing on small things, focusing on the most important things, focusing on the big levers. I think, and which I've said earlier, I mean, if you have constraints, you know, you have to prioritize, obviously. And I'm not government. I mean, government has what it does. We know there is even the so-called spending on education. We know there's so much leakages. I'm not gonna dwell on that, but my message to everyone who would listen is that please, let's focus on the most important levers. Let's focus on the top priorities, which is ensuring that every child in Nigeria has access to functional basic education. And when I say functional basic education, I'm talking about the first 12 years of education. I think that will make a whole lot of difference in the face of the funding challenges that we have. It's not going to go away anytime soon, realistically. And then the next lever, like I said earlier, is that the focus on another lever that is so fundamental, which is the people who are actually in the front lines, teachers. How do you ensure, and I mean, Engineer Adedamola talked about, you know, and even Tola talked about it also, Dr. Salau talked about teachers needing to be replaced, so many are retiring and all of that. What's the plan? Those are some of the things we need to look at. How do we attract educators, top educators, passionate educators into that profession, and how do we ensure that they stay? And I think if we focus on those two aspects, we would do a lot. You know, I like the Pareto principles a lot because you know, you focus on the 20%, channel your energy on the 20% that achieve 80% of the outcomes, and I think we would do well. We're not going to solve all of these issues overnight, but if we focus on those important ones, I think we'll make a lot of progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Akim Suber, CEO 1 Million Teacher. Thank you for joining the call. Keyword: functional education at the age of 12. Dr. Tola, parting shot in 60 seconds, please.
Okay. Parting shots. Well, I would say one of the things that I heard and we have really leveraged and focused on is being creative about trying to solve our situation. We all know that in this part of the world, and actually not just this part of the world, across the world, government itself can't do everything. So we've leveraged on a lot of PPP partnerships, as public-private partnerships, and it's not always cash. A lot of times it's in kind. When I mean in kind, I mean resources, and then we've utilized that for the training of teachers as well as the training and also working on what am I thinking of right now? Yes, refurbishment of schools, utilizing relationships. Like a lot of these schools, they have students who had graduated from there before and are interested in the upkeep of their schools. They come in, old boys and girls, they come in and they help to refurbish and upgrade their schools. We have utilized a lot of relationships like this. In terms of the issue of also CSR and not having enough of funding from the private sector, yes, I want to use this. I said, let me use this platform to encourage organizations and encourage people to realize that, as everybody has said, and I'm only just reiterating what everybody has said, investment, please, is not, education is not a cost. It really is an investment. We need to understand that it is not something that you're going to see immediately in 5 years. It's not something you're going to see in 10 years. But when you do see it, the ripple effect and the return is immense, is enormous. So remember, it is not a cost, it's an investment. it is something that continually adds and it gives us so much value. I mean, all I can think about is particularly our own generation. What is it going to look like when we're old? Wouldn't we want to see youth who are thriving and the economy prosperous and communities really, really vibrant? The only way that can happen is by investing in education. So I'm really looking forward to more organizations, partnering with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Parting short, private partnership. We cannot change education in silos. Dr. Frederick, we appreciate that you keep your questions short and straight to the point, please.
It's not necessarily the question, but it's something that I just want to chip it in. Elvis, when you look at African education, for instance, there are a whole lot of gaps between the rural and the urban education that we find ourselves in. So government is doing its best because there are a whole lot of budgets on the government machinery and so on and so forth. So for one, I believe that Edugist can also come up with another roundtable discussion that will encourage an individuals, for us to also to know our responsibility towards the rural education, because you can see that most of us came from the villages. Those villages, schools that we attended, and those that are related to our home villages, we can one time go there and do some form of donations. For one, I have another help the rural education project that I've been doing. Anytime I get something small, I get some computers and then look for the schools that they don't have the computers. Because if you go to the villages, you realize that they are going to write the same exams vis-a-vis the ones in the rural the urban areas. And then some of them have not even seen computers before. So I entreat you to come up with maybe a program like that, so that we can also encourage an individuals to also do some donation to our village schools. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Frederick. Akim, if you can keep it at 30 seconds, we are out of time.
Yeah, I just wanted to, when I said first 12 years of education, not 12 years of age. So okay. I'm talking about 12 years of education. I don't want to be, I hope I didn't,
yes. We got that, because ideally, if we would get enrolled in school at 6, depending, you do 6 years for primary school, and then you do 3 years for the first JS. So that's the 9 years. So we get the point. Thank you so much for clarifying. So Manus, that was not a question. It was a comment. You react to it, and that would be it. For Dr. Frederick, thank you. That's why we are here. We are an education newsroom and lab dedicated to conversations as this. We are open to as many support as possible, because key to our newsroom is community journalism, because schools in African communities is the heartbeat of the development of this continent. And so our doors are always open. That's why we are a social venture. We go for the news right in the office here. We're a team of experienced educators and, of course, veteran journalists that we want to give education a voice. So our doors are always open. Our email, info@edugist.org. We are very responsive. Manus, please, could you just close? But before you do, thank you so much. Thank you to Elsa and all your team members that have made this to happen. Please call it a day.
Thank you so much. Just all I want to say is to praise you for really bringing the education issues through your channel to wider attention. That's exactly what we need to have around the world. Nigeria has major issues. The urban-rural gap, of course, is one of those, as Dr. Frederick mentioned. But we need to really hold our decision makers to account for the choice they're making, because even though the road is going to be long, is going to be large, the challenge is difficult, but we need to make clear choices that prioritize education, especially for those children that have been left behind.
Thank you so much, Manus. Thank you, Dr. Tola. Thank you, Engineer Deomi. Thank you, Mr. Kim. Thank you to everyone on the call for joining us. It's the 60-minute mark, that's 1 hour, and this is where we'll end the roundtable. This recording will be available on our YouTube channel. On YouTube, we are Edugist Official. Let's continue the conversation online across social media at Edugist. You'll find us. Thank you for joining us. Have a great Thursday ahead. Bye.